Okay, I think we'll, in respect to the people who are here on time, we'll start. So, first of all, welcome, good morning, and welcome to all of you to our short webinar on business impact analysis. This, as you know, this was a risk assessment technique, and in these days of ever-increasing disruptions to our businesses, it's important that we know that we will be able to deal with disruptions and deal with them well and efficiently and effectively. In a short moment, Sandy's going to talk to you in detail about it, and I'm going to sit back and listen. So, Sandy, I'm going to pass over to you now. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jerry. As you know, you guys are all probably already aware of calQrisk and who calQrisk is and what it offers. So really, that's just a summary of who we are. As I said, the vast majority of you have probably attended webinars in the past, so the detail is available to you there. What we are hoping to today, and given that it's a 45-minute session in total, that will include some time for questions. So please do put in your questions as we go along, if you like. Jerry will keep an eye on that, and if it's something I should pause and address, then we'll do that. Otherwise, there'll be a opportunity at the end, obviously, to ask any questions that may occur to you throughout the session. So I suppose today we're looking at business impact analysis from the perspective of unlocking value for your own businesses. And as a tool, it's vital that it is, I suppose, approached from that mindset rather than simply as a tick box exercise. There's a reason for it, and understanding the potential impact of disruption is essential, as we know, for effective risk management. So that's where the business impact analysis tool itself comes into its own. In this session, we're going to be looking at business impact analysis as a strategic tool, basically to strengthen both operational resilience and business continuity planning, which, as we know, are different perspectives, but require a strong understanding of your own organization and how it operates. And I suppose that's almost irrespective of the size or the sector in which you operate. Ultimately, the exercise itself is not just a theoretical exercise. It can and should bring value to your own organizations. So today, the session's going to cover the purpose, I suppose, and the strategic importance of a business impact analysis. We will have a look at the key components of an effective BIA. And that's the most important thing, is to make sure that it is actually effective, and that in order to achieve that, what you should be including and why you should be including those elements. We'll also look at how to identify critical processes, their dependencies and tolerances. One of the key things I think it's important is to be aware of the common pitfalls of what can be or result in quite a siloed approach if it's not done, in as effective a manner as you can, and going into it with the best of, expectations, shall we say, about what the output's going to be. So it is important to try and avoid that siloed approach, and we'll talk about how we can overcome that. There's also then we're going to have a look at using the outputs of a business impact analysis, which ideally should inform your resilience planning, investment, and risk decision making. So that's the core of what we'd like to cover today. That's a good bit to cover in a 45-minute session, so we'll keep going. And as I say, if any questions occur to you, please do put them into the chat as we go. So I suppose to start with, it's no harm to kind of remind ourselves of what the definition of risk analysis is. And this comes from the ISO, which is usually the key reference point when it comes to risk and risk definitions. And it is defined by the ISO as the process to comprehend the nature of risk and to determine the level of risk. So this is something that we try and use constructively to help us to understand our businesses more. There are various techniques that can be employed in risk analysis. It includes items such as, or topics such as brainstorming, bow tie analysis, which most risk management professionals will be very familiar with, default tree analysis, event tree analysis, and so on. Today, we're going to be focusing in very specifically, because it's a limited length of session, on the business impact analysis technique. And this focuses very much on the consequences of negative events. We can often look at different other perspectives when we're planning and when we're looking at the impact on the business. But this is a very specific tool that hopefully will be a benefit to you and your businesses. So what is a business impact analysis? And more to the point, why is it important? I suppose at the end of the day, it's very much around, built around how your incidents and events are analyzed, and more importantly, how they will affect your own organization's business operations, should I say. It looks at critical functions, and the activities are ranked, and then looking at the dependencies that might be identified throughout this process. And this is why it's very important to undergo the process, because oftentimes we can think of off the top of our heads many dependencies or linkages between things, but it's only when you actually try to work through it in detail from start to finish and document it that some ones that you maybe wouldn't have automatically thought of will come to light. It also provides an understanding of the capability that is needed to manage a disruptive event. And as Jerry mentioned already, disruptive events have become a lot more common than we even possibly know. We hear a large number in the press, but there's probably an awful lot more. It's a bit like the tip of the iceberg, I think. There are a lot more disruptive incidents that we don't even hear about because, thankfully, probably a lot of them have done their business impact analysis. They've got their other tools and techniques that have been used along the way, and they're actually able to manage it. Hence the whole stressing of the operational resilience piece in businesses these days. The business impact analysis also encourages buy-in. And I think this is within the business itself. And this is done usually, by using a variety of techniques in terms of getting people involved in this business impact analysis process. You can be using questionnaires, interviews, workshops, and so on. And ultimately, it also embeds regulatory guidance. For example, the central bank's cross-industry guidance on operational resilience includes reference to the BIA process, and it refers to it as being a useful tool in determining impact tolerances for the business. So sometimes it's almost like the tail wagging the dog. We have SLAs in place with various outsourced service providers, and they almost more often than not come with tolerances that they're telling you what they will provide for you. But in going through the business impact analysis, you can kind of determine whether that suits your needs or not. And if it doesn't, whether you maybe need to revise it or discuss it with your relevant service providers. On the other hand, if you're one of an awful lot of people who are getting the same SLA, then the chances are they may not change dramatically, but at least you know how you have to adjust your own resilience arrangements in order to make sure that it suits your business needs. And whether it means extra resource or additional resource in other forms, then you can make sure that you are well prepared and you understand what the commitments are, both from the service providers who are potentially key dependencies to the business and or other elements of that also. In terms of what we use it for, I guess, and this comes back to the importance of it, I suppose, it is used to determine the criticality and the recovery timeframes of processes and associated resources so that, and this is the important part, that appropriate response plans can be put in place. If you determine and understand those critical elements, then you're in a far better position to have more accurate, more timely response plans. It supports a more effective restoration process because it establishes a priority list. And it's only when you're working through this in practice that you start to see, oh, well, I can't do that before I do this and so on. So it is important to go through that exercise. Hence why, it's not simply a tick box exercise, and having some form of a BIA is not really the ideal. You want to have an accurate one. It helps organizations to determine and select the appropriate business continuity strategies for yourselves to enable yourselves to have an effective response. And at the end of the day, a lot of strategic planning is about planning for uncertainties, and this is a key element in that. It enhances the strategic planning process around operational resilience and sustainability in a proactive manner, not waiting for it to happen and then be flailing around, but to be proactive about it, understand how you will respond in those types of situations is really important. So what do we need for it in order to do and to create a good business impact analysis? There are a variety of inputs that will be involved. I suppose to start with, central bank says that the business impact analysis should be achieved by considering the risk that a disruption poses to customers, to the firm's viability, and to its safety and soundness, and to its overall financial stability. So there are a lot of elements here. There are a lot of things that it is seeking to do and to support, and therefore there will in turn be a lot of different inputs into the process for it to be as effective as possible. So, for example, it's very key to have the organization's own objectives documented, ready to hand before you even begin this process, to understand where your business is aiming to get in terms of its strategic direction, to have a strong understanding of the environmental impacts around you, both in terms of operations, in terms of competitors, and so on. Also, your assets. So what do you have that will form the structure and the key elements to your business impact analysis in terms of the business's own assets? Your process owners will be vital here because they will all have key insights into the specific processes that you're looking to analyze and to have, to be able to replicate in a stressed scenario. So therefore, your process owners will have valuable information in this process. Also, at the same time, a clear outline of the roles and responsibilities of each individual involved in these processes will help to highlight any dependency issues that might exist. So again, knowing that one person or two people can do a particular role as an organization head, let's say, for example, doesn't mean that that second person who technically has the skills understands that they might have a role to play in this type of scenario. So it's about making sure that everybody is aware and that their key roles and responsibilities are known to them as well as just in theory in a job description or role description. You also need, to have, I suppose, the details of the activities and operations that the organization itself delivers. That includes details on your processes, your resources, your supply chains, your service providers, and those interdependencies we mentioned already. And that is important, that you have a clear picture of all of that. And it can be quite complex if it's a large organization. It can seem relatively simple when it's a small organization, but complexity can start to arise when you have a limited number of people trying to deliver all of the organization's services. And so it's important to have a very clear picture of what those are when you begin the process. You also should be at all times, I suppose, reviewing any previous incidents and disruptive events. Bad things happen. We all know that, and negative events happen. But for me, the key part is to learn the lessons from any of those previous events or near misses. Again, it's a valuable tool to benefit the organization moving forward. And so therefore, when you're preparing a business impact analysis or when you're reviewing one you may already have, look back and analyze events that may have happened in the meantime, see if it could improve your business impact analysis. If you're starting out with it from the first, look at a business impact analysis, then bring all the detail that you've learned from previous incidents to inform that process. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand you over to Jerry, who's going to discuss the business process mapping, which is a vital element of this whole business impact analysis exercise.
Thank you, Sandy. I'm a visual person, and I love maps like this because I can understand them far more quickly than 2 pages of text. And I suspect that many people are like that as well, that when you see a process mapped out using, I would say these are standard forms, it has a lot of benefits. One, and I found this particularly over the last 25 years since I first came across Visio back in 1999. The value you get, even not considering BIA, just to document a process, that you find out maybe there are gaps in your process, there are cul-de-sacs, there are things you haven't thought about. So a long time ago, I started mapping out processes using a tool like Visio. Now, this is from calQrisk. We've embedded BPMN, which is just a business process mapping tool, into the product. But the concept is really about getting a visual of your actual process. And it starts, these are standard icons, if you like, this circle, some kickoff event. The X box that you see there is a decision tree. So, in my example here, it's somebody's looking for a loan, and the first question you ask is, are you a member or not a member? And if they're not a member, then they go through a process of becoming a member. I'm just taking this as an example. In any organization, I'd imagine you would have, you could have 50, 60, 70 processes easily. Now, would you do them all? Well, I would certainly be doing the top 10, and then you might be motivated to do the next 10 and the next 10 and so on. Certainly when I've done this, I ended up doing everything because it was such a complete way of getting an understanding and of training people. If you think about it, you have to train people on your process. So the square boxes are processes or sub-processes, activities. The box with the X in it is a decision tree. And you can put in this tool, you can put in what the question is for that decision, and then you have an output from that, either yes or no, or maybe it's 3 options as I have here, that depending on the level of the loan in this example, it might need 1, 2, or 3 a particular level of authority to get a sign off. And you can see I've put a bit of color in here. There's other different symbols in here. You can make a process come to life. And hidden in the bottom left-hand corner, if a process itself is a sub-process is quite complex, you can embed that in this as well. You can see there's one box there with a plus in it. So, and these drawings, they can be output to PDF as well. They can be quite complex, and I'm not even showing any level of the complexity here, but if you have a detailed complex that involves 2 or 3 different departments, there is the concept of swim lanes, where you have a swim lane, if you like, per department. And as a process moves through various departments, maybe in and back out again, you can get that visual as well. So I'm trying to sell you the concept of business process mapping in a visual tool, because I think my personal experience certainly is you find out an awful lot about the process and maybe things that you thought were being taken care of and weren't. Now, when you've drawn up the process, because we're trying to understand the business impact of a disruption, you need to understand the dependencies. And the dependencies can be in terms of systems, that you need to deliver this. You need your banking system, and you probably need the internet to connect to that banking system. You need people. You need people to run the process, and which people maybe do you need at which stage of the process. And a key one these days for all of us is third parties. I think most of us now, we can't survive without some third party involvement in each of our process. So if you're going to do a business impact analysis, once you've documented your process, go through it again and say, well, who or what are my dependencies at this point of the process? And I've tried to list them out here. I'm not going to repeat them. Some third parties might be involved at different stages of it, but really it's to identify, which third parties do I need to be able to deliver this service to my customers? Which people do I need? And what I found again in the past is that when you identify people, you realize that you might have a single point of failure. That if Mary is out today, then this process doesn't happen. And that may seem like a very simple kind of example, but I've come across this more times than anything else, that one person is out of the office on holidays and certain processes come to a halt. And so documenting it like this, you will identify those people dependencies, the system dependencies, and the third parties. Now, this feeds into later, and Sandy will tell you that you might decide that a certain process needs to be brought back to life into a continuity state at least first. And then the systems that depends upon, maybe they're the first. It helps you with the ranking of what to do first when you have a disruption. I think that's all I want to say to this. Encourage you to map your processes and then identify your dependencies. Sandy, back to you.
Thank you. Okay, so I guess, you know, from a lot of your perspectives, you'd be thinking,
Sandy, sorry, I
yep,
see there's a question just come in, and can I take the
sure,
question?
of course.
Are dependencies the same as process inputs? Short answer is no, but maybe I'll let you answer that one, Sandy.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Dependencies, I guess, well, inputs, you'll gather from the beginning in that you'll have a fair idea of what you need in order to create these business process maps, but also the wider business impact analysis, which we're going to talk about in more detail of that shortly. The dependencies really are more that you start to see where you will have a problem if it doesn't materialize. So as Jerry was just saying, if you have one person and only one person can deliver a part of that process, you'll be able to see that you are dependent upon that particular person. It could be a third party that you haven't really thought about until you started to, relatively in your heads, minor third party, as opposed to the major obvious ones that you're used to dealing with, but that a process will fail if that dependency fails, if you know what I mean. So they're kind of like pinch points, and we're going to come to that a little bit further on. So hopefully that started to explain the difference, but there will be a little bit more on that shortly, if that's okay. So in terms of, what we expect to gain from your business impact analysis, there are a number of outputs. And I suppose it really means that, what is it we're trying to achieve? Ideally, we would like to see a prioritized list of those critical processes and their associated interdependencies, as I've just mentioned, that we're able to see almost at a glance if you use the graphical illustration Jerry just spoke about, but even if you work through it in terms of, text and so on, that you can kind of see, okay, we're a bit weak here. We need to strengthen either investment in a particular area or investment in resource, investment in the person. It could be their training. So it's not necessarily you're talking about major spend. It's about just knowing that you have alternates built in, or fail safes, if you like. And so we would ideally like to have that prioritized list of critical processes and their dependencies. We'd like to see a documented financial and operational impacts from the loss of critical processes. So, it gives you a better feel for what it would cost you if those processes weren't available or couldn't be completed. It should ideally give you some information on the resources and activities that you then need to invest in order to reestablish those critical processes. And when we're talking about those types of things, we're looking at, for example, areas where you might start to plan for actual practical information to be ready to hand in the event of a disruption. For example, contacts for forensics people, a contact phone number for your legal advisor, for the insurance company that need to be notified and engaged, the public relations company that you might want to use in the event of a, God forbid, a major event that you're going to need to communicate externally. And so if you having gone through this process, if you have that set of phone numbers already stored and accessible, then that's a big bonus. That's a strong place to at least to have achieved that and to be prepared to that extent. How do we look at those? And this comes back to, I suppose, the detail of the business impact analysis itself. How do we look at and analyze it and break it down? And the key components, if you like, are if you look at this sort of illustration in a spreadsheet format, you have a reference number for the process. That ideally, you want to have a list of the people that are responsible for that area. And this may, again, highlight your dependencies that we spoke about. You're going to document the process itself by simply naming it. You can start to populate information in the comments column that you might feel is a particularly noteworthy, something you want to really bear in mind that's important for the business in regard to that particular process. You'll then populate your system dependencies. So what are the IT elements, hardware and software that need to be in place to deliver that service? And then you could maybe look at some other dependencies, such as you can't run it without the internet, or you can't run it if you don't have access to the building, or if you don't have the right staff. I would then be looking at your maximum tolerable outage, and that's what MTO. You'll often see MTO and RPO even mentioned in terms of business impact analyses. And the maximum tolerable outage is basically the maximum time you could actually, I suppose, bear to be out without a major issue arising. So, for example, when we're talking about new member onboarding, you might say, for example, that you can live without it for 3 days, but after that, you start to get into bother. But then the other side of it, and the other aspect of that, is your RPO, which is your recovery point objective. And that's your more ideal scenario where you would like to be back up and running. So if you can build in your systems, your service level agreements, and so on to meet your recovery point objective, then they understand what service that you understand, and they understand what the service level agreement needs to cover, and what your aim is. You can then split it out, if you like, into 12-hour, 24-hour, 48-hour, 72-hour elements, where you kind of, on a scale of 1 to 5, at what point do you reach 5, where the impact the organization's really starting to suffer. You can determine your own scale as to what a 1 is and what a 5 is when you're designing this, but it means that you know that once you reach the 12-hour stage, in some processes, you're going to be, you can cope with that, that's fine. In other processes, you might be really starting to struggle. And so therefore, that helps you to create your priority list. So you'll know, for example, that if you don't reach a 5 for 72 hours or 2 days, then that's going to be further down the list compared to a process where you start to reach a 5 within 24 or 48 hours. So again, coming back to the point of trying to help you to prioritize and see which processes are more critical to getting your business up and running in a timely manner. Oh, I will say, by the way, that, sorry, go on, Jerry.
Yeah, there was a question, somebody asked about the recovery time objective, and I think we killed that column in this. There's of course the 3: the MTO, the RTO, and the RPO. And if I can answer the question very succinctly, the recovery time objective is, I think it's always half the maximum tolerable outage. If somebody said we can live without email for 4 hours, if I was the IT person, I would be aiming to get it back in 2 hours, because often a decision to press the button to go into business continuity mode doesn't happen for an hour or two. So our TOs generally, as you described, the time, the ideal time we want to be back in. And the RPO, and I know there's a bit of confusion here, is how much information can you afford to lose? You know, what point do we have to, do you want to go back to? Is it okay yesterday evening for the backup, or is it a half an hour ago? You know, how much data can you afford to lose, really? So yeah, there's apologies. We left out the 1 column because we thought maybe trying to cover the 3 in 1, but of course somebody asked the question. So hopefully I've
and I was literally about to say, we have actually a more detailed template that we'll issue with this, that is a bit more detailed than the simplified one that we have actually put up on the presentation today. So hopefully that will help in kind of making those distinctions a bit clearer. Thank you for the question, because there's probably a lot of people thinking the same thing. So appreciate that. In terms of the benefits of having and conducting this business impact analysis process, I suppose the best way to think about it is to consider what the good or the best companies are doing in your industry, in your sector. To complete an effective business impact analysis can be quite time consuming, but it's better done in a calm and controlled, non-stressed environment or situation than having to make it up as you go along in the middle of an incident. And that's never a good place to be for any of for the blood pressure of anybody involved. So doing and creating this business impact analysis in advance provides, you know, a deeper understanding of your critical processes that we've mentioned throughout. It supports the ongoing compliance across your business and leads to better decision making. So, you know, I think that's really important. It aids in the prioritization of your recovery efforts, which we've mentioned a few times. And unless you've worked through this process and you can actually compare one to the other, and also identify your dependencies, because oftentimes the priority list can come back to what system do you need to get up and running first, and it may impact on multiple processes. So it does also help to minimize your downtime, ideally, and importantly, to minimize financial loss that might be incurred. And it does this by restoring your critical functions in the correct order. There is no point in wasting valuable time restoring systems and using limited resource to resource systems that are kind of far less important in the grand scheme of things. It does also, at the same time, facilitate a better allocation of those limited financial and human resources. Very few organizations have unlimited assets to draw from, both financial and human. So therefore, you need to make sure that you're making the best use of them, particularly in a stressed and challenging situation. The BIA should also improve your operational efficiency, because when you're working through that exercise and you start to see those pinch points I mentioned in response to the question earlier, these are basically vulnerabilities that you may or may not be aware of until you start to detail it out. And that's why, as Jerry mentioned, that graphical illustration is really useful, because it does help you to visualize where those pinch points may occur. It could be a pinch point down to an internal resource when it comes to staff, when it comes to training, to qualifications of various staff. It could be pinch points in terms of dependency on a third party. Also think about it in terms of the number of businesses that could be dependent on the same third party. So if you think about it so that's when we talk about concentration risk. If you start thinking about it in terms of your own SLA with your third party, but don't bear in mind that they're also going to be serving SLA, trying to provide that same service to multiple businesses in your sector, then that can have an impact on your own planning. And so therefore your business impact analysis should include that. You can also have things like, for example, when it comes to those third parties, do you have out of hours support? So you can almost guarantee that an incident is going to happen at the least convenient time for either yourselves and or your third parties. So if you have a service contract that covers business hours 9 to 5 or 9 to 6, whatever it is, on a working day, and the incident happens on a Saturday, are you sure that you've got the level of out of hours support that you need? Do people have access to the contact details for the out of hours support? Because sometimes that's not the same thing as the in business day contacts, etc. So it is important to bear all of those in mind, and the business impact analysis exercise provides that, I suppose, discipline that hopefully should result in gaining those benefits. In terms of contractual issues, it's also important to bear in mind that, a contract, you might think you have a contract of support for that you need, but it's only when you work through this incident and you actually work it through to its ultimate potential, I suppose, materialization, that you might see that you may need to revisit your contractual arrangements to see, maybe you do need more out of hours support than you thought you did, and so on. So it's also really good to help you see whether your own OSPs, your outsourced service providers, are adequately resourced themselves to deal with a widespread problem. And look, we know that's reliant on you asking a question and almost having to take their answer as, very few are going to come back and say, no, we're not prepared, or we're not going to be prepared. But the fact that you've asked the questions and you've, asked them maybe more challenging questions about exactly how prepared they are will give you a better feel for and reassurance for their own level of preparedness in this type of situation. So I mentioned at the beginning that there is a tendency when you look at a business impact analysis to rely on the knowledge and perceptions of the individuals involved in creating this and documenting it. And that can result in what we call a siloed approach, where you're blinkered in your view of the process, what's needed for it, how to deliver it, and so on. So it's really important to always keep looking at the bigger picture, taking that step back and seeing how it all fits together and does it all work together. And then it's really important then to see that you haven't, I suppose, forgotten about or looked at things too much in isolation, and therefore not actually got a strong feel for how, that process and how it relates to others. So it does, it is important to make sure that you understand what must be in place before the process can even begin. Because oftentimes when we start to look at processes, we pick a step. But there may have been other previous things that needed to be completed, but they're to do with another process. So you have to make sure that you understand what needs to be in place even before this process can begin. For example, if you're in a financial services lending organization, you cannot begin lending unless the banking software is working. If the banking software is cloud-based, it won't work if the internet's down. So you need to know what key elements need to be in place before the process can even begin. You need to understand, for example, if you're a lender, that loans over a certain amount cannot be improved if the internet link to the central credit register, for example, is not available. So while your banking software might be available, if the internet is not available, then you still can't start. Your member onboarding process maybe cannot be completed without your AML member risk assessment. And if that has a dependency, or a problem in terms of resourcing or access, depending on how you deliver that, then you need to know about that as well. As the business evolves, various elements can and do change, and new interconnections and dependencies will arise. So therefore, it is important to review and update and share the findings regularly. So it's not a one and done exercise. I think it's good to do it the first, get it as detailed as you can, but there will be things that will change. And so a review process really does need to be built in again, so that you don't kind of think, oh, well, that's sorted, and, I don't need to worry about that ever again. So unfortunately, as with most things in life, it's not quite that simple. So I would say that the key takeaways from today's session really are to make sure you know the risks to your business. Understand the ones that threaten your continued operations and the potential consequences of service disruption. Once you know that, you can plan much better for how to address it and make sure that they're minimized. I would say absolutely identify and map your key processes in critical services. Whether you do it, in writing, but I would say, the visual map for me, I always think, because I think it does help to communicate, especially when you're doing it collectively. People learn and observe in different ways, and that mapped illustration will really help whoever's involved in designing your business impact analysis or in activating it to understand exactly what's going on at any particular point in the process. It's important to get a strong understanding of the level of resilience that crucial third parties have. So where you've identified through your process mapping and your business impact analysis, all of that, and your objectives in terms of recovery times and so on, compare that with the relevant equivalent, if you like, with your third parties. Make sure that they match, and that they'll be able to deliver the service you expect of them within your targeted requirements. I do think it's really important that you gain a strong and deep understanding of your business's pinch points, and we all have them. There is no, if you had unlimited funds and unlimited staff, maybe you wouldn't have pinch points. But we all know in the real world, you live, in a world which limits resources, and it limits, spending and investment and so on. So you have to understand where your pinch points are so that you can adjust for them and plan for them. And that's what the business impact analysis helps you to do. So I suppose that is business impact analysis in a relatively short, I suppose, burst. Any further questions apart from the ones that we've been asked already, or hopefully those ones that were asked have been answered adequately?
We have a couple of questions.
Okay, Jerry.
Following up probably on the previous one, should MTO, RTO, and RPO be assessed considering the peak period of that process? So worst case. I mean, I can
And
comment and you can comment.
I was just going to say you can fire away on that one. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, yes is the answer, because if you take and this is one that I did with the customer, we were looking at processes, and one of the processes was payroll, and the payroll was done on the last Tuesday of the month. And if that payroll didn't run on the Tuesday, well, you can imagine the impact on this company. Had about 85 employees. And then they discovered, looking at the process, that there was only one person who could actually run the payroll. So yeah, I would say it's good to ask, what is the critical point of the month, and what's the worst that could happen? Because Murphy's Law, it's going to happen on on the worst possible day. Um, then again, you might say, well, okay, payroll a day late probably isn't the end of the world, but do consider the worst case. Yes, absolutely. Mary said they were very insightful. Thank you. I have one other question here. Who should be involved in the business impact analysis exercise? It's a good one. Sandy, I'll leave that to you. Who should be
Okay.
involved in the exercise?
Well, I would say anyone who is key to delivering the process. So if you're talking about a lending process, your senior loans officer or the person who deals with it most on a day-to-day basis, because they will have insights that somebody from the outside looking in, even within the organization itself, won't have as clear a handle on what's required, and it's both though, because you can't, if you get let's say the process experts to map it out, there's a lot of built-in knowledge that they won't even occur to them to write down. So it does need a number of different parties,
Yeah.
so that you can ask the challenging question where, the loans officer said, oh, we get from A to B, and you say, yeah, but how did you get from A to B? Did you need, a third party? Did you need a document, and so on? Was it an extra internal resource? Because they're so familiar with it. And they can be so, practice and experts. That's why we call them subject matter experts. But they might not break it down to the level of detail that would be really important to achieve with your business impact analysis, so that you can identify, again, those dependencies and pinch points. So I would say as many, as are involved in the process, both from an expertise perspective, but also from an oversight, so that you can ask the questions almost, it's like we often say when we're defining procedures, give it to somebody who's never done it before and see if they could deliver it following the steps. That would be my view.
Yeah, not much to add to that, except in one that I was involved in, and there were people who were involved in different parts of the process. And somebody asked a question about documentation being produced, and they said, "Oh, that's done by the other department." And they were in the room. They said, "No, we don't." And it was a clear, there's assumptions sometimes in the process that somebody else is looking after something, and this was a very clear evidence that nobody was doing it, and it was a good outcome. There's one more. Actually, there's two more. Any tips with getting retention to the BIAs? Can be tough chasing people for responses and delays of the overall delivery. Getting retention, I'm not sure if it's retention, can be tough chasing people for responses and delays of the overall delivery. I suppose, if I can comment on this, I think it has to have the support of senior management, and certainly of the CEO, that if you accept that a business impact analysis is important for the organization to understand the consequences of disruptions, then I think the CEO needs to issue that, if you like, order that you will contribute. That would be my now there is the other one, as you said, Sandy, that there are benefits for people, so you might have to sell the benefits to the people as well. So a bit of stick and a bit of carrot, I would think. And I think we have time for one last question. So I'll ask it. It's for you, Sandy. What processes should be analysed in this manner? Oh, have you time to answer that one?
Okay. Well, to be fair, it's actually almost a short and sweet answer, in that I would look at the organization's existing full list of procedures. So you're going to have, depending on the size and complexity of your business and the sector that you're operating, you will have more than likely quite a substantial list of procedures. And I would say start with the most critical.
Yeah.
You know, the vast majority of people will be able to identify the top 10 processes that you know are vital to your organization and your customers. And you start with your BIA on those. And I think, Jerry, you even mentioned right at the beginning, like if you've done the top 10, you actually almost, I suppose, and this might be a bit sad, but I think you actually start to see the benefits quite quickly, and you get really enthusiastic, and it's like, God, that was really helpful. Let's do the next 5 or 10. You know, it might not be this month, this quarter, it could be 6 months' time or whatever. When you come to it next, plan to come back to it and build or allocate them out amongst people, and then pool your, you know, bring all your experts together and go, right, where do we enhance this? So yeah, I would say start with looking at the full list, identify your most critical, your top 10, begin with those and take it from there.
Okay, I think that's all we have time for. So just remains for me to say thank you for your attendance, and thank you, Sandy, for a very detailed, comprehensive description of business impact analysis. Hope to see you all again at future webinars. Keep an eye out on our website. We have a series of what we call summer school short webinars, even shorter than this, coming up over the next 2 months over the summer, just when you're not busy in your during the summer. So thank you, Sandy. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
You're very welcome. And we will send out the slides, and we'll send out that template that I mentioned about the business impact analysis. So we'll send those out afterwards.
Excellent.
Thanks, everyone.